You log into your brokerage account, you look at JEPI with a 30-day SEC yield of 8.20%, and then you glance over at JEPQ, sitting at 12.87%. And the natural human reaction is to think, wait a minute, they are both managed by JP Morgan. They both pay me every single month. Why on earth wouldn't I just buy JEPQ and take that extra yield? It feels like an absolute free lunch. But what if I told you that extra 4.5 percentage points isn't free at all? It is a very specific mathematical trade-off that most investors completely misunderstand until a market correction hits. Today, we are popping the hood on JEPI and JEPQ to show you exactly where that extra yield actually comes from, the hidden risks inside those massive dividend payouts, and why picking the wrong one could silently destroy your long-term compounding. What's up? I'm Tony, and welcome to Grow with Tony. On this channel, we strip away the financial jargon and hype to help you build real, sustainable wealth. If you're tired of surface-level stock advice and want to know how the market actually works, you are in the right place. Just a quick heads up before we dive into the numbers, this video is strictly for educational purposes and sharing my personal market perspective. It is not personalized financial advice, so please use your own judgment and do your own research before pressing that buy button. And one more thing. The numbers in this video are from the day I made it, and figures like these can change, so check the fund's own page for the current one. All right, let's get into it. To understand why JEPQ pays you more than JEPI, we first have to understand the engine that powers both of these funds. A lot of people think these are just standard dividend ETFs, like SCHD or VYM, where the fund buys a bunch of companies that pay dividends, collects that cash, and hands it over to you. That is only partially true. Yes, both JEPI and JEPQ hold a basket of underlying stocks, and those stocks do pay some dividends. But traditional dividends only make up a tiny fraction of the massive yields these funds generate. The heavy lifting, the real income engine, comes from a derivative strategy. Both of these funds use a covered call strategy. If you are new to options, let me explain a covered call in plain English. Imagine you own a house worth $500,000. I come to you and say, I will pay you $1,000 in cash right now, today, if you promise to sell me your house for $550,000 anytime in the next month. You think about it. If the house stays at $500,000, you keep your house, and you keep my $1,000. If the house drops in value, you keep my $1,000. The only catch is if a massive bidding war starts and your house is suddenly worth $600,000. You are legally obligated to sell it to me for $550,000. You capped your upside in exchange for upfront cash. That is exactly what a covered call does in the stock market. You cap your maximum potential profit in exchange for immediate upfront cash today. That upfront cash is called a premium, and that premium is what JEPI and JEPQ distribute to you every single month as that juicy dividend. But here's where we get into the weeds and where most retail investors get lost. JEPI and JEPQ do not actually sit there writing individual covered call options on hundreds of different stocks. That would be an absolute nightmare for the portfolio managers, and it would trigger a massive amount of tax inefficiencies. Instead, JP Morgan uses something called equity-linked notes, or ELNs. This is a crucial structural detail. Up to 20% of the portfolio in these funds can be allocated to these ELNs. An ELN is essentially a custom-built contract created by another massive financial institution. Like a big bank, JP Morgan essentially goes to another bank and says, we need you to package up a covered call strategy on an index and we will buy that note from you. The bank creates the ELN, and that note generates the massive option premiums that flow directly into your brokerage account. Now, why does this matter to you? 2 reasons. First, it makes the funds incredibly efficient to run, which is why they only charge a 0.35% expense ratio. But second, it introduces something called counterparty risk. If the massive bank that issued the ELN goes bankrupt, that portion of the ETF could theoretically go to zero. Is that likely? No. These are massive, systematically important banks. But it is a structural risk that you are taking on, and it's something you need to be aware of when you allocate a massive chunk of your net worth to these funds. So, now we know the engine. We know they use ELNs to generate option premiums. But that still doesn't answer the golden question. Why does JEPQ consistently pay a higher yield than JEPI? To answer that, we have to look at what they are actually holding, and more importantly, what they are writing options against. JEPI stands for the JP Morgan Equity Premium Income, ETF. Its benchmark is the S&P 500. But it doesn't just hold the S&P 500 blindly. The fund managers actively select stocks within the S&P 500 that exhibit lower volatility. They are looking for the defensive plays, the stalwarts, the companies that don't swing wildly from day to day. They hold these low volatility stocks, and then they use those ELNs to write covered calls against the entire S&P 500 index. JEPQ, on the other hand, stands for the JP Morgan Nasdaq Equity Premium Income, ETF. Its benchmark is the Nasdaq 100. It holds the massive tech giants Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon. And it uses ELNs to write covered calls against the Nasdaq 100 index. This difference in the underlying index is the entire key to the yield gap, and it all comes down to one single word in the options market: volatility. In the world of options, volatility is everything. The price of an option, the premium that someone is willing to pay to buy it, is directly tied to how volatile the underlying asset is. Let's go back to an insurance analogy. Selling a call option is a lot like selling car insurance. If you are an insurance company, and a guy walks in wanting to insure a 10-year-old Honda Civic that he drives 2 miles to work every day, you are going to charge him a very low premium. The car is safe, it's predictable, and the odds of a massive explosive crash are relatively low. But what if an 18-year-old walks in wanting to insure a brand new twin-turbo Ferrari? You are going to charge an absolute fortune for that premium. The asset is highly volatile. It moves fast, it's unpredictable, and the odds of a massive swing are incredibly high. In the stock market, JEPI is insuring the Honda Civic. The S&P 500, especially the low volatility stocks that JEPI holds, moves relatively slowly. Because the market doesn't expect massive violent swings, the option premiums generated by JEPI's ELNs are moderate. Therefore, the yield is moderate. 8.20%. JEPQ is insuring the Ferrari. The Nasdaq 100 is packed with high-growth, highly volatile tech stocks. It swings wildly. Because the market knows the Nasdaq can rip upward or crash downward violently on any given week, option buyers demand more protection and option sellers demand more compensation. The implied volatility of the Nasdaq is almost always higher than the S&P 500. Because of that higher volatility, the ELNs inside JEPQ generate much fatter premiums. And that is exactly where your extra yield comes from. It is not free money. It is a volatility premium. You are getting paid more because you are holding a fundamentally riskier, more volatile basket of underlying assets. Once you understand this, the illusion of the free lunch completely vanishes. You realize that you are simply making a trade. You are trading the stability of the S&P 500 for the volatility of the Nasdaq 100, and you are being compensated for taking on that extra risk via a higher monthly dividend. But this brings us to the most dangerous part of investing in covered call ETFs, and it is a trap I see income investors fall into constantly. It's called the total return illusion. When people look at JEPI and JEPQ, they get mesmerized by the dividend yield. They see 12.87% and think, great, I'm making almost 13% a year. But your yield is not your return. Your total return is your dividend yield plus the capital appreciation or depreciation of the actual ETF share price. Because of how covered calls work, these funds have an asymmetric risk profile. Remember our house analogy? You capped your upside. When the market goes on a massive roaring bull run, JEPI and JEPQ will absolutely underperform their underlying indexes. And we can put real numbers on that. In 2023, the Nasdaq 100 returned 55.13%. JEPQ returned 36.28%. So it captured about 2/3 of that run and handed the rest over. In 2025, the Nasdaq 100 returned 21.02%, while JEPQ returned 15.19%. The gap is not always that wide. In 2024, the Nasdaq 100 returned 25.88%, and JEPQ returned 24.82%. So that year they were nearly neck and neck. But the pattern is clear. The harder the index runs, the more of the top you hand over. But what happens in a crash? When the market drops, covered calls do not protect your principal. If the Nasdaq 100 drops 20%, JEPQ's underlying holdings are also dropping 20%. Yes, the monthly dividend provides a small cushion, so JEPQ will drop slightly less than the pure Nasdaq index. But you are still capturing the vast majority of the downside risk, while only capturing a fraction of the upside potential. This is where the difference between JEPI and JEPQ becomes critical to your portfolio strategy. Because JEPQ is tied to the Nasdaq, it is far more sensitive to this dynamic. In a brutal bear market, the Nasdaq usually falls much harder than the S&P 500. During the 2022 tech crash, growth stocks got absolutely decimated. And we can see what the strategy did for JEPI that year. The S&P 500 fell 18.11%, and JEPI fell only 3.54%. That is a real cushion. Now, here is the honest caveat, and it matters. JEPQ did not launch until May 3, 2022, so it has never lived through a full bear market year. We simply do not have a calendar year of crash data for it. So when I say JEPQ's share price would likely bleed faster than JEPI's in a downturn, understand that this comes from what it holds, not from a track record we can point to. If you are a retiree living off the income of these funds, that capital erosion is terrifying. Imagine buying JEPQ at $50 a share. A recession hits, tech gets crushed, and the share price drops to $40. Not only have you lost 20% of your principal, but your actual monthly payout in dollars will likely drop as well, because the fund has less total capital to write options against. JEPI was explicitly designed to be defensive. JP Morgan states that it seeks to deliver less volatility than the U.S. large-cap market, and the portfolio managers actively pick stocks that act as shock absorbers. You can see it in the holdings. Its largest position is AbbVie at 1.7%, and the whole top 10 sits between 1.5 and 1.7%, so nothing dominates. JEPQ is the opposite. Information technology alone is 50.9% of the fund, and NVIDIA by itself is 6.7%. JEPI will still go down in a crash, but structurally it is designed to experience far less severe drawdowns than JEPQ. So, when you choose JEPQ for that extra 4.5 percentage points of yield, you are explicitly saying, I am willing to accept a much sharper drop in my principal during a market crash, and a wilder ride overall, just to get a bigger monthly paycheck. One more thing worth knowing about that payout. JEPQ's 30-day SEC yield was 12.87%, but its 12-month rolling dividend yield was 10.69%. Same fund, same day, almost 2 percentage points apart. That gap is telling you the monthly check is not a salary, it moves. There is another massive hidden cost we have to talk about before you buy either of these funds, and that is tax drag. When you buy a standard dividend stock like Johnson & Johnson or Coca-Cola, the dividends you receive are usually qualified dividends. The IRS taxes qualified dividends at a very favorable rate, usually 15 or 20%, depending on your income. But the income generated by JEPI and JEPQ does not come from standard company profits. It comes from the ELNs, from option premiums. The prospectus states plainly that these distributions are taxed as ordinary income or capital gains, except inside a tax-advantaged account. This means the vast majority of the distributions you receive from JEPI and JEPQ are taxed at your marginal income tax rate. If you are a high earner in your prime working years, and you are holding these funds in a standard taxable brokerage account, you might be paying 30 or even close to 40% in federal and state taxes on those dividends. That 12.87% yield on JEPQ suddenly turns into something closer to 8% net after Uncle Sam takes his cut. And remember, you sacrificed the massive capital appreciation of the Nasdaq to get that heavily taxed income. This is why for the vast majority of investors, especially if you are under the age of 50, heavily allocating to JEPI or JEPQ in a taxable account is mathematical self-sabotage. You are stunting your portfolio's growth and generating a massive tax bill in the process. These funds are vastly more efficient when held in tax-advantaged accounts, like an IRA or a Roth IRA, where that ordinary income is sheltered from immediate taxes. So, how do you actually use these tools in the real world? Who should buy JEPI and who should buy JEPQ? If you are an investor who genuinely needs current income, meaning you are retired, semi-retired, or you are actively using your portfolio to pay your mortgage and buy groceries, JEPI is typically the safer anchor. It is diversified across all sectors of the economy, it deliberately targets lower volatility, and it aims to give you a smoother ride. You're giving up the highest possible yield to protect your sleep at night. JEPQ is for the income investor who is willing to play a little closer to the fire. You want current income, but you also want exposure to the massive growth engine that is big tech, AI, and semiconductors. You accept that your portfolio value is going to bounce around a lot more. JEPQ is an excellent satellite position to boost the overall yield of a portfolio, but relying on it entirely as your sole source of income exposes you heavily to tech sector corrections. And one thing to check before you add JEPQ: if you already own an S&P 500 fund, a total market fund, or a NASDAQ fund, then with information technology at 50.9% of JEPQ, you are buying more of the same handful of companies you already hold. That is doubling down, not diversifying. Many savvy income investors actually hold both. They use JEPI as the bedrock for stability, and they layer in a smaller position of JEPQ to juice the overall yield and capture some of that tech-driven volatility premium. At the end of the day, that extra yield you see on JEPQ isn't magic, and it isn't JP Morgan being generous. It is the direct mathematical result of holding more volatile, riskier tech stocks and selling insurance on those wild price swings. Which of these two fits your portfolio right now? Are you leaning toward the defensive stability of JEPI, or are you chasing the tech-fueled yield of JEPQ? Drop a comment below and let me know. I read every single one, and it helps us all see how different investors are tackling this complex market. And if you want to keep looking under the hood of the market with me, instead of just blindly chasing yields based on what a screen tells you, hit that subscribe button. Remember, in the stock market, you never get paid for free. You either pay in cash or you pay in risk. Make sure you know exactly which one you are handing over. See you in the next one.